want to create a flange for it. So I'm going to collar it in a little bit and then stretch it back out. So I end up having this kind of curved little area on the top, and this is where the lid is going to sit in into this groove. So this is a great kind of lid for production because it's a very versatile. I mean, you can, the lid doesn't have to fit exactly perfect, so it gives you a little bit of leeway. Of course, we're going to make our lids fit perfectly, but okay. So what I want to do now is I want to measure the top, this top flange with my calipers, and I want to measure not all the way at the edge, not all the way at the outside edge, not in the inside, but right kind of in the middle from top to bottom on this flange. So I want to actually make a little touch with my calipers on the pot itself so I can make sure that I measured it in the right spot. Then I'll take a second to smooth that back out. So I have my caliper measurements. This is the inside of the pot measurement. So now if I make a lid that is the width of this outside measurement, these two things should fit even though they're thrown separately. So now let me get ready for the lid. I like to demonstrate this kind of lid first because it is thrown right side up. Most lids are actually thrown upside down and you add the knob separately, but with this particular type of lid, you throw it upside down and it has very minimal trimming. I mean, you throw it right side up and it has very minimal trimming after it's done. So the first thing you want to do is, the amount of clay that I have here is about half or less, like half or less of however much the pot that I threw was. So that pot was basically 1.5 pounds or something like that, 2 pounds. So this is probably a little bit less than 1 pound. So I'm going to center it. And then the throwing motion for this particular form is a little different than what you've done so far to start with. Okay, so once it's centered, now I've told, probably you've heard me say in class, not to use your sponge, but to always use your fingertips. This is one of the only exceptions is when you're throwing wide. So what I'm going to start with after I've centered it is I'm going to spread this out by moving some of the clay out to the outside edge. But I'm going to leave enough clay in the middle to throw a knob. So what I have now is almost kind of like a centered mound in the middle of this. And I still have plenty of clay out here for refinement. So if I look at my calipers, I can see that the width of my clay that I have is a little bit bigger than what I need, which is good. That means that I can make it be what I want it to be, and I'm not going to have to stretch clay and make it too thin. That's usually the biggest issue people have with lids, is that they actually don't give themselves enough clay and they end up being too thin. Okay, so now the first thing I'm going to do is throw this knob. So I want to do this just basically by throwing a little tiny pot in the middle of this form. Start by making a hole. Excuse me. Okay, so I want to not put a lot of water on the inside of this and start stretching it out, making it sort of be the shape that I want it to be. And I'm going to just like collar this in until it actually closes. Okay, so now I have an air bubble, which I can manipulate around a little bit now if I want to. I can like undercut it a little bit so it gives it a little bit existing out in space a little bit more. easy for that to get a little bit off center, so don't undercut it too much. So, okay, so now to finish the rest of it, I usually like to put a couple of decorative rings out here, a place for the glaze to collect. Now I'm going to take my calipers and mark where it actually is the edge so that I have kind of a line. I'm going to stop the wheel and test this and see. It's still just a little bit big. But I want to actually cut off this extra clay that's out here. So I'll do that with my handy dandy trimming tool. And then try to see if that'll push it out. All right, so now that I have it, I truly do have the size. I want this edge to be thrown. So what I'm gonna do is put my fingers underneath it and like raise the edge up from the wheel a little bit and then throw it just one time. So it just kind of like pulls it out there. I wanna make sure that it's the width of my caliper measurement at the outside edge. And if I need to, I can cut it off just a tiny bit. I'm going to do that in this case because I want it to match my caliper measurement. So I'm just going to cut off a tiny bit. And then smooth out that outside edge and we are set to go. This is an upside down, right side up lid. Right side up. Okay. Check my, last thing I'm going to do is check my caliper measurements. And these are right. Okay. There you have it. So the one thing to remember about this, when you trim it upside down on your lidded pot. Make sure that you poke a hole in this knob from the underside so that it's just like any other time. You cannot have trapped air in clay. So there's your lid. Okay, for the second kind of lid, which is an upside down lid, I have thrown a slightly different shaped pot. It has a straight neck instead of the very flared one that I showed you. And I'm going to once again measure the inside of the pot with my calipers. I want my calipers to touch each side so that I have a pretty accurate picture of the measurement. And then I'm going to throw a different kind of lid for this. Okay, so I have my caliper measurement, and now to throw an upside down lid, I'm gonna use this about the same amount of clay as I did for the other lid, just about a half of the amount of clay I used for the form. And so this is something you have to kind of judge based on the size of the lid that you're making. If you're making a tiny lid, of course, you need just a tiny bit of clay. So I'm going to center this. All right, and I want to kind of flatten it out so that it's just slightly wider than the caliper. So this needs to be flattened out just a little bit. Okay, so, all right, now I'm slightly wider than this. That's what I want. Okay, so now what I want to do is start by pressing in the middle just like I would a pot, but only just slightly going in. So go down just a little bit. I want to leave the part, like basically the bottom, that would be like the bottom of a pot. I want to leave it as thick as possible because we're going to trim it away later. But so I want to just pull this out. What this is doing is making the inside of the bottom of the lid. So this lid is upside down. So I want that to be almost as wide as my caliper measurements, almost like that. Just a little bit farther. And then I'm going to push in from the outside a little bit. So what I'm doing is I'm making clay here that I can bring up into a really short little wall. So I want to basically throw a very short, tiny cylinder wall from this. Okay, not very far. It doesn't have to be very big. So this is the part that will fit down inside the pot. So I need for this to be the same measurement as my calipers. So when I look at this, I see that I'm pretty close, tiny bit small. So what I want to do is press out just a little bit on the inside. Essentially I'm adjusting it until it matches my caliper measurements. And it does now. So you can notice that I have this tapered kind of end like as it goes up. So the only part that's going to actually touch the inside of the pot is right down here. This will be, just keep it from, falling off. It helps it have a wall. This is where it would actually touch. Okay, so now again, I want to take a second and throw this little bit of edge out here so that it has a nice thrown area when I'm turning it upside down and getting it ready to sit on my pot. I check it one more time, last thing, to make sure the caliper measurements are correct, and that is an upside down lid. So we will trim both of these lids in a second operation.